9703 extra cab F-150, full tube chassis, all the stuff. Robbie Gordon shocks. It functions insane. We're here.
Hi.
We're in Las Vegas. We're here to check out something really cool. Nick's here.
So cool.
Evan's here. Morgan's here. Wow, 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 dude. Wow. We are outside of Justin B. and Smith's prep facility. We have a special vehicle, so I have to touch on this. I grew up on Race Desert forums and the interweb looking at this vehicle, and it's a twin. So Scott Steinberger has jet blue. And it's a 9703 extra cab F-150, full tube chassis, all the stuff, patent motor, big punched out small blocks. And these are like, some people call these an old school pre-runner. I call these the perfect pre-runner. I don't think that they are old school. They're capable. And this thing has Robbie Gordon shocks. It was built by Nestor at Newline. I just talked to Nestor just to get any other information about this thing. But it's beautiful. Its presence, I think you can feel. It's an absolutely special truck. We rode in it yesterday. It functions insane. Why isn't the owner here? Jay and Bill are the people who kind of maintain and own this thing. They're doing life, they're doing stuff. This was really something where Jay hit me up. He knew we were going to be out in Vegas. And he said, hey, I can get the black truck to you if you want to ride in it and you want to talk about it. He's like, I'd rather you do it and host it. And I know enough about this thing where we can like geek out on this thing right now. It's a 03 F-150. Little bit of a shortened wheelbase there. One thing you will notice is it's on 37s. Now, it's almost something where if you look at it, you don't think that until I say that. Trailer Products glass, this was all specifically built for these vehicles. This thing's gorgeous. I don't know exactly where to start, but we can kind of just scope the exterior here. Nestor Berardi owned Newline. He was, at that time, Jake with Jake's Fabworks was working with him. He was commissioned they wanted to build 4 of these, and they were specifically going for and inspired by the Riviera pre-runner, which is Mark Post's pre-runner. I think they call it the Black Diamond, and it's the same style vehicle. 9703 Ford extra cab, tube chassis, just another beautiful pre-runner. Very comparable to this thing. Robbie Gordon shocks. That whole program. They were constructing 4 of these. Nestor and Jake kind of went separate ways. Nestor finished out 2 of them. He finished out this one, then he finished out Scott's jet blue that everybody knows, which is the same exact truck as this, exact twin, except I think it's on Robbie's, and it's blue. It's really blue.
So this is the first one?
They were built at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Simultaneously,
Gotcha.
next to each other. On the Race Desert show and tell forum, there used to be like epic pictures, I think it was on show and tell. There used to be like epic pictures of this thing with another chassis, and they were built like a lot of people build high-end pre-runners now, but they were really kind of the first of their kind to have really good design and really well thought out plate work and sheet metal work. Like even the pivots. That's your pivot to your upper link that's in the door right here. So everything is completely built out of function. So this is a 97 cab, right? So you have a 3-door. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The extra cabs, you have the 1, 2, and then passenger third that opens. So I'm going to go on that other side to show it. And this was just better to film outside of Justin's shop over here. It's a weekday. He's got people working, so instead of jamming him up and having this kind of go on, we just had him bring it out here. Justin's got a pretty badass program in Las Vegas. Prep, fabrication, maintenance on all high-end motorsports off-road cars.
So 2-seater, and then you got a nice little spot for your cooler right here in the middle.
Yeah, and that's an addition. This was a true 3-seater before.
Oh, it was a true 3-seater. Okay,
Yep.
so they took the third seat out.
Yeah, and then obviously like all your real estate here behind the passenger seat and the driver's seat is all shock.
Right.
You can see the bolt here for the shock. So there's just a lot of service there. But again, like this is all chassis bulkhead for the pivots tied in. Obviously aircraft stuff going on here. Under each seat is like a small cavity. There's air, there's a recovery strap, a couple more recovery items. And with these kind of cars, getting storage wherever you can is optimal. You got to squeeze it in, because once you start to package like a high-end luxury pre-runner, real estate goes away. So I thought that was always trick, and it's like everything's designed really dynamic. There's tension on all of the tube work and everything, where it's not just like 90-degree things, straight up, and 90-degree bends, and like everything is kind of tapered and pulled on a little bit to really like have style. And what happens when you do stuff like that is the whole vehicle starts to just be this one big style masterpiece, as long as like you keep that design in frame through everything.
Super nice plush interior, wrapped dash and center console, suede headliner with some nice reading lights or whatever, your battery shutoffs here.
You want to be a pro? You call it a map light.
Map light, sure, whatever.
I knew that. I was testing you.
All the fuses and stuff right here, yeah, very well thought out here for sure.
So to piggyback on that, steel dash, all hand-built steel dash. The dash was rebuilt. Nestor said that he built this whole thing originally with tube and then sheet metal over the tube, but like built where it's blended and then wrapped. This one was rebuilt. So analog gauges, kind of a period correct thing. I think that thing's on an I did it column, so it's not coming off.
Okay.
But this is kind of your essential like older generation pre-runner, where there wasn't so much Motec, there wasn't like race packs were just coming to fruition, but especially with like old patent motors, they're like, this is just the OG way, like switches with breakers, everything tidy.
Everything's a toggle switch instead of like a Switch Pro system or.
Well, and there's not really a lot of toggles. This is really just breakers, so everything's more wired in, and if something pops, and then you just reset it.
Got it.
Just your mains are hitting here,
Right. And there's a couple over here, driving light, spotlight.
Yep. It's super comfy. You can see like even leg room wise, everything's all good. It's completely packaged proper. The dash isn't too tall. Everything's wrapped. And then you can see like the headliner is a really quality unit here. And then the dive you see here with the tubing, that's to clear the third person occupant head there. So you can see like there's a shelf here, and that's a tube wrap too. So that's actually the cage, but it kind of waterfalls off here and then goes to a higher plane back here. So then the third occupant can be, safe with his head. Battery cutoff down here. This is kind of your old school marine carpet.
Yeah.
A lot of vehicles, pre-run vehicles, they run a marine carpet like this for obvious reasons, weather and cleaning and all that. Now in here, this is more storage, right? So obviously there's more of a trash can in this one. Well, it's just beat up water bottles. But that whole box here is a storage pocket on each side.
You know what this kind of reminds me of is like, it's similar to like an RV build.
What?
You shouldn't say that.
Well, no, I mean,
that's terrible. That's the shittiest thing there is.
No, as far as like trying to think of like how to package things to where you have like as much storage and like tight spaces, like in that sense, not quality wise.
Like RV build.
When you're building a custom like RV or you're renovating an RV, you're always thinking about, okay, well, I only have so much room here, and then like I need storage for this or whatever. And so you're always kind of like, how can I package this in a way to where I can have some storage here and then like still have room for this and it still be like lightweight in a sense, all that kind of stuff. So you're just really well thought out. It's awesome to see builds like this.
And those constraints also apply to aircraft.
Yeah.
And they also apply to marine stuff. A lot, not so much like a DCB or something, but like an actual seagoing boat. There's always like really trick compartmentalized storage, right?
Yeah.
So this thing's plush. Yeah, it's like this is everything you want. really, you know, and it's simple. There's not like too much gaudy stuff going on here, but it's just it's a duty pre-runner. It's beautiful to see it because, like I said, 2 of these got finished all the way. The other chassis never is. I don't know if someone knows where that is. Comment. I would love to try to find that thing, maybe personally. And then the third one, if you guys have seen Dust to Glory, there's a classic I-beam F-150 red that Mario Andretti was driving and wheeling around. That is one of these that was converted to I-beam instead. So stay woke. I just heard that one from Nestor too, so that's pretty cool because that was always one. That's how that went. 2 of them went to wide open, and that's who was constructing the I-beam program, and Jake was over there helping with those. So whenever you see Dust to Glory and you see that red F-150 with the beams on it that changed a lot of people's lives, that's one of these. It's just with a front beam setup. So
I remember that truck specifically.
Yeah, everybody's like, that was badass,
Yeah. Well, and you had Mario Andretti there behind the wheel, it's
totally
adds to it.
So one of the other things on here that we talked about was the Robbie shock package. Robbie Gordon shocks, and I believe this is right. So if I'm off on this, I'm sorry. But they are a 4-inch coilover with a 7-inch spring. They are the first pioneering of like an internal bypass setup. The way they are engineered is not an option where they're built to absolutely be pounded on. They like to be just abused. And if you're not driving the truck fast, you will not like what they do. And that's your typical kind of Robbie Gordon style of driving. When we rode in this thing yesterday, it was impressive because I'm like, oh man, it's kind of like soft and squishy, and it's going to hurt when we start going through big stuff. And as soon as we would check up on like big rain washouts and huge chopped 4-foot, 3-foot drop-offs into G-outs, and I was like, oh, and I would brace, and then it would just go through it better than it was doing anything else. And then every single time we presented it with a challenge like that, where it was going to be a pucker moment, there was 0 of that. So most impressive, most dynamic ride I've ever felt in my life.
To this day!
Why don't you tell me about the front end of this thing? Let's just start in the front. So
Don't tell me what to do.
thanks. Have a good day.
Don't tell me what to do.
This picture and this whole setup, these upper arms, the Robbie coilover, and you can see just for size.
Yeah.
Let me bend the
Size
handle.
reference. That
You know?
thing's huge.
That's the coilover. And this is same stuff. So like on Robbie Gordon's trophy truck, on JetBlue, on the Riviera pre-runner, they're all running this big package. And now I think even the speed side-by-sides are getting a derivative of this. But this is all your typical program for this. J-arm front end, obviously big center mount, lower arms. So another example of size here. The Robbie shock also, so for the front, they don't really incorporate a hydraulic bump stop. You can see like there's almost like a slapper just for the upper.
Like a poly.
Yeah, a poly. And that's just like your secondary bump. The bump is built into the shock. So it really, for packaging too, these things, it simplifies everything because you're taking up so much less of a footprint.
Right.
And the reservoir being piggyback, you're not having to locate reservoir locations and mounting points for that, and you're not doubling down with with a bypass in there too.
Right.
So obviously the headers are something to see, but I'm going to kind of come to the front and just let you see what's going on with the rack too. So you have your big upright. There was a brake upgrade on here. So back in the day, there wasn't as many options for that. There was like CNC brakes. You get like a 6-piston CNC. There was some Willwood stuff, but now kind of your cream of the crop is like a big Brembo. So Alcon rotor with a Brembo caliper under here. And then, big uprights, 1.25" Heims on the outsides. Everything's on 12-point aircraft hardware. And then you see the rack. So this rack is reversed. It's flipped. Usually the steering rack here would be facing the other way, 180. And it's built into the front. And then there's just an extensive amount of plate work in here. All tied in. And really, like for back then, people weren't doing as much plate work. Yeah. They were doing a lot of tube, very simple tabs. So that's why I say this truck, like Nestor had style and design into this that not a lot of people did.
You can say it was ahead of its time.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's kind of, look at like the care taken into the, like even the bracketry to hold the radiator. Like there's angles and there's brakes, and there's, transitions. There's miters hiding in here. There's transitions of plate work to supports to gussets. Everything is kind of thought out, and really integrated into this thing. Same with the lower arms, pocketed lowers. That was even a thing that people were not all the way transitioned into doing.
Okay.
Interesting.
Oh, it's triple strapped.
Nailed it. If you kind of see the primaries on the headers, they are long tube headers, and to favor the Robbie shock here, the front primaries they're equal length for sure, or they're close to it. You can just tell by the shape. You can kind of tell by the packaging here of what's going on with the headers. They wanted to run a nice long primary, equal length, and the only way to do that, especially with such tight quarters in here, is to wrap the two front primaries around, and everything's kind of favoring the shock, the reservoir, everything like that. The motor in this thing is also an OG motor, the Patton family, Patton. They have been making like legendary race and pre-run motors for all of time. These motors are expensive and they're badass and they're reliable. There's not too many people that have them in just your run-of-the-mill pre-runner, but once you start digging into the guts of a lot of the like heavy-duty OG pre-runners or even newer pre-runners, Patton motor is like the bee's knees. And if you see valve covers in there that have like the flag and the Patton, you know that thing's gonna. This is just very simplified things. It's hard to get things this simple. Even the firewall being so flat. This is your coolant overflow tank. That's just a reservoir. This thing doesn't. Oh yeah, it does. It has wipers. That's a huge plus.
That's a huge thing.
Yep, it is.
Even like common garage-built pre-runners, none of them have wipers.
Yeah, and in a lot of high-end pre-runners, they skimp on wipers. And I tell you, when it rains, and it does rain, unless you're going fast.
Yesterday
we cut short.
Yeah, we were cut short because it was raining. Just not that bad.
Yeah.
But we don't have wipers, can't see shit. So
the front clip here, same thing. And I wonder, like I said, that the front glass was built for these trucks, and it might have been built for the Riviera truck first, for the Mark Post pre-runner. But all these louvers, that whole thing is just a vibe that has like stand the test of time. And I know Robbie had that. That was inspired from like Robbie too, from when he had like the Valvoline car, later to be the Menards truck.
Now the louvers, would this mostly be to help cooling?
It's extraction.
Or a little bit of aero too?
Well, I think part of the louver program is like extraction from heat.
Yeah.
And then also dust extraction.
Okay.
But also like parachuting, and it's not like this thing's built for jumping.
Right.
But when the car does get lighter in the front, you don't want that to act as a big canopy.
Right.
Where it parachutes and it pulls it up. Standard radiator up front, very simple accessory mounting here, like your oil filter, your power steering reservoir with the filter. It's all right there. There's a dry sump pump right here. So that's for your oil, for your engine oil. It is a dry sump motor, meaning that it's a pressurized oil pressure at all times. There's not a pan under there. It's more of just kind of a engine cover that feeds pressurized oil in there. So before we go under this thing, some details to note here that also are like the staple for this truck is this. This was one of the like iconic things of the back of this thing. Now what's changed? When it was at Herps, they did do the modification of the coolers. The coolers were flat, right? Or close to flat. So what was happening is they were getting rock splash from the bottom. Stuff was kicking up. They were taking damage. It wasn't that it wasn't cooling well. It was just not optimal for service because you were replacing those things. So they did raise the coolers up a bit. But this ducktail here, like this is what made this truck. The Mark Post pre-runner, I don't think it had down tubes. There's a time and place for trucks with down tubes. and there's a time and place to not have them. And you know, a part of that also revolves around if you have enough structure in your extra cab from your B pillar to your C pillar, because if you don't tie in from the B pillar and tie down, then it's just going to break apart. And like Pfluger's pre-runner back in the day, that was a thing. They did that, but they didn't prep like the chassis the right way and lay stuff out where it could handle that. So you can pull this off 100% as long as you're starting this concept and you have the intention to not have down tubes, because they're so structural. So if you have the intention to not have those, you can build accordingly in here, and that'll supplement structure all the way through. So I think Riviera Black Diamond car had this. There's storage in here. We'll open that. But really like the shapes here. Really cool. Really unique. You know, love it or hate it. I think a lot more people love it than they hate it. And it's a statement, right?
I love it.
One thing on this truck, and I talked to Jay, I think it might even go down to us to get 40s put on it, but it's going to be an endeavor. If you look at here, this is a 37, and it is built for 37s.
Yeah.
There's ways to make this work, but obviously it's going to be chop cut and rebuild, you know?
Yeah, right, for sure.
So just looking at the presence here, that's special. You know, what do you think?
Hey, keep going, brother. You got me all. Yeah, I love it, man. This kind of, these older pre-runners. I mean, you know, I'm a graphic designer, so you know, a good design is simple, right? So, you know, when you look at something like this, and it's obviously very well built, very purpose built, but there's some simplicity throughout. It's well thought out. It flows, and there's, you know, they've covered things in the right spaces with the right shapes, especially this back end, man, how it's all just covered in fiberglass.
Yeah.
It looks really good, and watching this thing work yesterday was pretty amazing.
Totally. And also, like, you know, piggybacking again on what you say about simplicity, when you start to look at this, simplicity is oftentimes the hardest thing to accomplish, and it takes the most amount of work. It's really easy to build stuff busy, but when you have intention to have stuff flow and be packaged stuff in a way where you go, man, it's so simple looking, because it's doing that to you.
Right.
And it's because everything is so well thought out.
Right.
You know, and even just like design wise, symmetry wise, you know, everything.
It all works, man. I mean, like if you saw this thing coming down the street, obviously it's much wider than a 03 F-150, but I mean, from a distance, you'd be like, oh man, that looks like a pretty cool, you know, F-150. And then you get up on it and you're like, oh shit, it's a full tube chassis, crazy, gnarly thing. But from a glance, you know, it might just look like a nice pre-runner.
Totally.
You know, so.
Totally. So getting back to it, there's, you know, obviously the bedsides are completely molded in. 9703 tail lights still here. I love that there's just factory headlamp and tail lamp. You can really screw the pooch putting black backings on it. It works for some stuff, but like especially with something where this is like a very refined, kind of pristine looking example of a pre-runner, that having that just red breakup and that factory light makes sense. You know, you have nitrogen in there. You have a Bunderson jack here. You have your air pickup here. That's also doubling as the hold down for the fuel cell here. And then you have provisions for your drive shaft, your spare drive shaft. So spare drive shaft is in the back with just a secondary just in case bumper. And you know, it's not a race vehicle. So when you guys think, well, what if you're going to get nerfed? You know, unless you have a buddy that's being a jackass, people don't come up and nerf you in these things. These are either fine tools that you're using to pre-run a course with. They are not like a race vehicle. If they have to get into a race as a support vehicle, they will. But sometimes a secondary measure is definitely necessary. And obviously a spare drive shaft is always necessary.
There's even tabs for a license plate.
Absolutely. And this is a street legal vehicle.
Barely.
A lot of times you go, well, how do you get it street legal? There is special construction. So for California, there is special construction vehicle licenses you can purchase and you can apply for. They give out a certain amount per year. There's also just doing the dirty bird and finding a registration guy that can take care of you for a certain fee. And then there's also a lot of out-of-state stuff where it's a lot easier to register these things.
There's even counties in California where you don't have to smog. So if you can somehow get a mailing address or a residence address in one of those counties where you don't have to smog, that's another way through the system.
Yep.
As well.
So I want to go under here because when I watched this was, again, like, I looked at pictures of this. I had this stuff printed out on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper taped in my garage. That's where this truck was at for me. And it wasn't this. It was just both of the JetBlue and this one on their construction phases. The way they did the panel work under the car, that's why I want to get under there. There's really cool packaging and just badass work under here. You guys can see kind of short wheelbase. I want to say this thing is close to 125, just based off of things I've worked on. Look at how robust the coilover is in there. One big old coilover. You can see the up travel is super sufficient. Whoa, super sufficient. A lot of the higher end pre-runners too, they have like I guess just tube chassis pre-runners, they have an outrigger tube. So sometimes the coilover or the shock package in the rear is actually inboard of the chassis tubes. You know, instead of like sometimes your frame is inboard, so you're tying off from your frame, right, and they're coming out towards the bump zone instead of, you know, in and going towards the bump or out, whatever.
Is there any advantage or disadvantage to doing it that way?
No, it's just chassis because there's a lot more. The chassis is built wide pertaining to the cab versus a frame rail.
Gotcha.
So what you get here, like right off the bat, is your fuel cell in the rear. Just a big custom tailored fuel cell for the back of the chassis. And then your tube works housing. Tube works housings have been around for a long time.
Okay.
There is no doubt that they are some of the nicest welded and fabricated housings ever.
Right on.
And they retain that. And you know, what I call tube works housings is like lifer housings. You can usually put a tube works housing in your pre-runner. You know, race trucks get a lot more abuse, so I don't want to like vouch for that, but when you have one of these, you usually take this with you. Okay, well, we're gonna get rid of the truck, you know, blah, just put something else in it and just take the tube works, you know, or I'm gonna do a new project, I'm gonna just take the housing because they last forever. So I'm sure this is the same housing that was built in 2003.
Right on.
I don't know if we mentioned this, but these cars were constructed in 2003.
So this was a brand new cab, or
Yep, exactly.
yeah.
This is just like someone right now building a 2023.
Gotcha.
Because that was just the newest, latest, greatest cab.
Yeah.
And it's just cool because who would have known that it was going to turn into something so iconic and legendary.
Literally 20 years later,
and it still holds.
Being used and prepped
and looking
admired,
badass.
Admired, yeah, for sure.
Yep. So you can see again the brake upgrade in here, and then what I want to do is kind of move into this cavity here. You know, very tidy lines running through the middle of the car. That back pocket, I want to get in there, but you can see first off is your storage. So your lines run up, and then this whole box here is storage from the top. You can see the bump stops are inboard of the chassis,
right,
which is kind of different. You can see another filter up there, and then all your lines are just wrapped and protected. It's really nice for service because there's a bulkhead. So bulkhead meaning there's a point of connection, like there's a junction there, I guess, of where you can take those off and you're not removing complete lines.
Right.
The up travel here, I want to say it's close to 20 inches.
Yeah.
Something very substantial,
100%.
And you got to think about like when the stroke of the bump stop is compressed, there's probably 20 inches to this, which is super impressive. Something else to note is the packaging on the sway bar. So your sway bar is actually trailing arm mounted. So your tie rod for your sway bar pivots on the trailing arm. It goes up, and then it's got its own home, kind of living in here, and it's tight. Like I can't fit my finger in between the nut here that holds the tie rod to the sway bar arm, and then the arm is very wedged into there, and then you can see the sway bar is coming. It's that tube that you see right there. So it's just like, look at the packaging. Sometimes when things inspire you, you don't realize that you're building stuff that was from stuff you saw before.
Right.
And with like when I look at this, some of the things, it just this is what changed me when I was younger.
All right, Morgan's moving into better position. He's all cheesed out under here, guys.
What does that mean, dude?
You're all cheesed out. You like it?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So symmetry. You can see there's complex plate work here. where the trailing arm pivot is, that's your upper link pivot. And remember, we saw the bolt in the cab right here. And then everything is cleaned up. Like your tube structure going to the cab is all plated. There's no loose ends. And then what's going on with the sheet metal I was talking about here is, instead of building the sheet metal from inside the cab, you're building it from here. So there's no like tube and then, you know, plate on the other side of it. Like almost like, it would almost look like this, the whole back of that chassis. Everything is, you know, being considered for tidiness and cleanliness here. You can see everything is just running right down the middle. That's your trans tunnel, right? So exhaust is living lower, and then all of your plumbing is running through that tunnel because you're really kind of out of real estate. Your batteries are living in their own little container here. And really, you know, you shouldn't be having to pull batteries. There's leads here where you can tie in and trickle charge, but the battery is something that really can live in the car, and then when it goes bad and you replace it. It's not so much of a prep consumable. So again, just, you know, how tidy things is. You can see there's another access panel here.
Would you say that like having the panels on the outside like that would kind of help eliminate little crevices for like dirt and like grime and shit to collect up in?
That's 100% of the reason, and that's the reason that I do it, is because not only does it look cool like having all of it like this, but think about if everything was built like this part, right, where there's a panel here and it's on the other side, so it leaves this whole tube. So you go weather, debris, mud, like it's such a pain in the ass to clean this, when if you just built it like this on the exterior, then the inside's going to get foam and carpet and everything anyway, so it's never going to see any kind of, you know, environmental stuff hit it, you know. So like there's like a super sick wind there, and it was the first time I had ever seen that. Again, look at the Robbie shock here. Like it's a huge endeavor in its own pocket there, and it's kind of just a crevice. That's part of the cab in here, and then you see just the exhaust kind of dumps. Good symmetry here, and this is the, you know, from the other angle, you know, simple trailing arms, bushing style front, no uniball, which is kind of different now. And these are long. These are 60-inch trailing arms. So, you know, a lot of people are running like a 55. Some trucks even run a 50. You can see just how long this is, and what that does is this thing, it hooks up and it grips. When you throttle it, you don't spin, you hook up. And it's amazing how good this works. So anytime you can favor running a long trailing arm, I would do it, and 60 being long. You can also see there's the nitrogen tank is living up there. Again, that's something that comes, you know, you can take your spares out and you can fill that thing up, and then it can just live in there. Probably good to do it for big pre-runs, but you know, if you're not doing a big pre-run, you can probably just have that thing in there for a while and not use it all.
Right.
A big nitrogen tank like that will last quite a bit of time. Even the bump stops here, that's not a normal 2.5 can on there. That's a longer body. It's not your typical. I don't know what size, like that's something custom. It's a 4-inch stroke for sure, but that whole length there, the height of it is definitely something not just off the shelf.
Yeah, that's like an 8-inch shaft.
Totally. Go away. What do you mean, man?
It's an 8-inch body.
Another good view too of the sway bar under here, and just it's almost in line with the chassis work. And then again, those guys are, yep, very neat, slick stuff. You can see some miscellaneous hard lines going through here for brakes. And I actually, you know what? That's suppression. So that's all suppression system. And then there's your brake. So classic kind of tube chassis program, big, flat belly pan going right to the cab. This is the rocker of the cab here. Just a streamline hit where there's no frame hanging down. And then you can see the center mount there.
I asked Morgan what wheels these are, because these aren't your typical method KMCs or nothing.
Nope.
What kind of wheels are these?
They're Pro-Am.
Pro-Am.
They're special. They're not available. I don't think they make Pro-Am wheels at all anymore. Thomas's Exotic has another derivative of a Pro-Am wheel.
Okay.
but they're just solid, badass wheels.
Right.
Obviously, I think this might have had Robbie Gordon wheels for obvious reasons before, but those still kind of, I think those work, you know.
And these are anodized. These aren't anodized. These aren't powder coated. So that's an interesting. As you can see, it kind of has a purple hue to it. I'm sure they were black at some point, but being as old as they are.
Yeah, that's what happens with anodized.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Matt, there's no solid winds you get. It just, if they see the sun,
Yeah.
the stuff fades.
For sure.
It is what it is. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
It's, I've seen it on all kinds of stuff, and it is what it is. It'll hold. So you guys can see, like, getting space winds wherever you can is huge. And what's really cool is seeing, like, the chassis incorporated into the storage, but obviously, like, tool bag and then fluids, always essential items for pre-running. And if you needed to, you could stuff more stuff in here for sure. This is really thick. This is like a 3/16 aluminum panel, so you could probably step on this if you needed to be up here,
Gotcha.
because it's just setting right on top of the chassis. But it's just, like, I love little cubbies like that. They're so cool. And if you just look at this thing as a whole, it's just another great, like, addition. You know?
Right,
And
right.
there's no down tubes here, so you can get in there no problem. You stand on the tire, and you're good to go. I think we talked about the battery. So obviously here's leads right here to plug in for a trickle or a jump. Did you go through the storage on this side? There we go. So another storage. This might be Rain-X or something, fast orange. Hand cleaner. You can see battery cables going in here. And then this thing's kind of a void. The Scott's truck had the same thing. You can get pretty far in there. Probably goes to, like, where the dead pedal is here. So little winds, and then obviously, like we talked about, there's your upper link. That's all structural chassis stuff right there, which is so cool. I love that you open the car and you, like, see part of the chassis in there. Gas pedal, just very simple. Cable driven. You know, again, there's just good stuff here. This guy is for your brights. RJ's Ranger has the same thing, and I've asked him before, and I space on it. I don't know why. But that's, you know, your high beams. Just for passing and whatever. This is your brake bias. Yeah, I asked Jay yesterday if he uses that or they need it much. He said no. And then obviously just, again, analog gauges. Very simple. There's obviously tablet provisions here. You got your old school phone in here. You know, fire suppression. This is all just your standardized items that make for a really sick pre-runner. Just all shell seats, you know, so there's upgrades. Like, I think Scott's pre-runner had he had low backs in this thing. So there was a low back is where there's not actually a head portion. He had low back suspension seats. And I don't know if he had, like, the head thing, the separate head thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I know for sure he had the low backs in it. And Scott's was also, I think this was too, but there was, like, with old school mini trucks and, like, street trucks, they'd use tweed interior.
Right.
Tweed was like a thing, and tweed is a type of material. It's almost similar texture to the carpet down there.
It's
but
tough.
It is tough. It's almost like hemp, like it's like a potato sack.
Yeah.
You know, but Scott's is a tweed headliner here with, like, tribal flames in it, just to keep that period correct hit going.
Oh yeah.
You know,
2000s, bro.
So, you know, got your VIN. Everything's dialed. That's kind of this thing wrapped up. I think we're gonna do the best we can to shoot JetBlue, and I just, fortunately, I'm in enough of a position here where people contact me about these things.
Yeah.
And then I hit up, you know, Evan and James and everybody. I'm like, let's go shoot this thing, and we find some badass cars. So I think it works for both sides. You know?
Well, and with these high-end pre-runners, man, you're the best one to explain all this stuff to us, because I look at it and I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but I can't pick it apart like you can. You know?
Yeah, and I live for these. Like I mentioned, this is something I grew up. These vehicles, like, it's a blessing to be able to see this and ride in it, and it's almost like a bucket list item.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, for sure.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this thing. We're out here in Vegas, and we had a great time. Thank you, Justin Bean, for facilitating this. Thank you, Jay, for facilitating this and contacting me. I appreciate you. We hope you enjoyed this. If you have comments about this thing or anything, you know, if you have questions for myself or Evan or Justin Bean, maybe you need a car prepped out here, you have some kind of a race program you want to facilitate out of Vegas, hit up Justin. And other than that, you know, like, comment, subscribe. Have a good day.
Yeah, for sure.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. We love you. Thank you for the support. Yeah, like I said, if you have any questions and we don't know the answers, then we'll find out for you. So, yeah.